For Creamer Media's Policy, I'm Sashnee Moodley. Researcher and analyst Professor Raymond Suttner joins me for Suttner's View, a weekly commentary on South Africa's political scene. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you.
The local government elections are hotly contested. How do you see this development?
I see today that some people are contesting the Ipsos polls, which ANC runs every Thursday night. But as far as trends go, I think we must take seriously these polls. And according to the Mail and Guardian today, the ANC's own polls seems to point to an even more gloomy picture for the ANC. And what is emerging from these polls is that the ANC has a good chance of losing 2, maybe 3 metros, or not getting 50%. Maybe in all 3, that is Nelson Mandela Metro, Tshwane and Johannesburg. What is interesting about the trends, and as I say, I don't know if these trends are going to be valid, but they are likely to be give some indication of the possibilities. DA is leading in all of these areas, but not getting 50%. There are a number of undecided people, but from the polls it appears that the ANC is recovering ground in all of these metros, although not so much in Tshwane, and that what remains of undecided voters may go mainly to the ANC. So, we don't know. But what looks likely is that in Nelson Mandela Bay and Tshwane at least, the ANC may not get 50%. It's not certain that it will get 50% in Johannesburg either, because from what I recall, ANC is below 40% there. It's just behind, about 3% behind the DA. Now, what it means is that EFF has a mandate not to form a coalition with the ANC. So that since the DA may only need about 10% to get 50% in some places, or let's say they need 10-11%, they will need less coalition partners than the ANC, and they may be more likely to be able to form a coalition with all the problems that you have with coalitions. If the ANC tries to form a coalition, the historical enmity that the ANC has towards the DA is not so strong, probably, than amongst COPE. Maybe they can persuade UDM because he was formerly in the ANC, but he was not treated well in the ANC. So that there are these little scraps of parties, but given that the EFF is excluded for the ANC, it means they have a much harder job to form a coalition, unless they were to get 48%, and then they only need 1 or 2%, which may well happen here in Johannesburg. But it doesn't seem likely in Port Elizabeth, Nelson Mandela Metro, or in Tshwane. What's interesting about Tshwane is that they say that the candidate, Didiza, has not been there, not been around. And visibility is very important. The candidates are very visible, but in different ways in these other places. And the support of the ANC in Tshwane, according to the Ipsos poll, has actually dropped since the period of the violence, which you would have thought would be the worst period for them. So what I think we may be seeing is a period of coalition rule, where organizations which have different ideological orientations will have to agree on a program. In other words, when the DA says they're prepared to consider we've governed together with people who share common principles, you don't form coalitions always on principles. You form coalitions on agreed programmatic issues. You don't say, are you a Marxist? You must be a Marxist. You say, are you prepared to agree that we will spend 50 million on roads, 50 million on water, 50 million on this? Now, it's likely that the DA and the EFF would be able to agree on something like that if they approach it that way, which is not to say that it will be stable, because, we don't know how they will relate to one another in this environment. And you can see collapse, and the question will be whether keeping the ANC out will be sufficient incentive to keep them together. Alternatively, the ANC may be able to form a coalition, and since it has experience in government, maybe it'll be more stable. In Johannesburg, for example, they will have to form if they don't get 50%, they are more likely to be able to form a coalition than the DA, I think, but I don't know. So we're seeing a new situation, and it's also reflected in changes in the discourse. Athol Trollip was on 702 yesterday, and he was speaking about Port Elizabeth, and he's saying Port Elizabeth is two countries. You go from the airport, you see all these beautiful homes and all of that, but you don't see the Port Elizabeth of the poor. Now that's ANC language when they talk about Cape Town. Now the DA is appropriating the role they think of the champions of the poor, even though their records on inequality is not actually so good. So I think there's a lot of change. It's a very important election, and we may see the ANC lose at least one, maybe two, maybe three even metros. The EFF say they may well win in other parts, even in KZN, but we don't know. The thing with the EFF, you don't really know what, there's a lot of drama, but you don't really know what that means in terms of the actual support that they will have.
Do you believe these elections have significance in terms of the ANC holding onto power more generally at a national level?
Well, it's interesting. 12 years ago, there used to be a lot of debate about South Africa being a dominant party state. And people would say the democracy is not consolidated unless there's the potential to defeat a ruling party. And in South Africa, there's no chance of that happening. Therefore, democracy is not consolidated. Now, personally, I used to attack this because it's a dogma. The fact that one party stays in power, you have to examine the conditions. And at the time, there were very strong reasons why people were opposed to the DA because of its history and its supporting SADF raids and things like that in the period of apartheid. What's interesting is that 10, 12 years later, you have a situation where the electoral dominance of the ANC may be under threat. Now, already in the 2014 elections, a lot of people didn't register to vote who were qualified to vote. And if I'm not mistaken, the number of people who voted for the ANC in 2014 may have been less than 1994, or it was proportionately less. But definitely the number of people who could vote, there's a lot of them who are not registering. And it's the ANC that's mainly losing that. And these elections, these local government elections, may be the start of a road towards the ANC no longer being dominant organization, losing its 50%. And, it's important to stress the uncertainty, because there's a lot of historical reasons why people are supporting the ANC, and what we see in Johannesburg is not the same as some of these villages, and the media are not covering these villages well. I'm not sure how the Ipsos polls are definitely not covering them, because they're focusing on 3 metros. And I think we've got to understand that we can't predict easily, but the loyalties are being broken up because people are not bound by a common vision any longer. They're not bound by the enthusiasm, the willingness to sacrifice, the ethos of the liberation struggle. And I think it may well be that what we're seeing now could be the first step towards the ANC losing a majority, but what comes in ANC's place, one doesn't know.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
That was Professor Raymond Suttner speaking to Creamer Media's Policy about the local government elections and the ANC's electoral dominance under threat.